Okay. So I think, should we start, Jayashree?
Sure, I think we can begin.
Are you? Okay. All right. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Archana Sharma, and I'm the founder of Samvedna Care. And welcome, everyone. I'll just request everyone to please mute themselves if you would not, just, and you will have a chance to ask your questions. So kindly mute yourself so that the flow of the program is maintained. So I would like to start by sharing about Samvedna Care. So Samvedna is an organization which is working in the area of mental health and well-being of adult population, as well as we have been working with seniors in Gurgaon, Delhi, NCR region for various types of services. So we provide mental health support for long-standing mental illnesses, mental well-being services, as well as we have done a lot of work in neurodegenerative disorders like dementia, Parkinson's, and we understand that the while there is a disease which and the patient who has to be taken care of, and there is the well-being of the patient, but we also strongly understand and that the family is the one which is primarily impacted by all this, and how do we create programs or awareness for the carers of the people who are going through an illness. And Savedna has various programs in that area, and we'll talk more about that as we go into the session. So today we are here to really talk about mental health and resilience of women in caregiving roles. And the month of March, as you know, is a Women's Day month, and you have seen a lot of programs, I'm sure, and discounts and schemes going celebrating women. I think it's not a day. Women need to be recognized and celebrated every day because of the who they are, and what roles do they play. So there's no limit to what we as women can do and accomplish. Globally, the burden of caregiving falls squarely on the shoulder of women. It's a default. 66% of carers are female, and on top of that, they spend as much as 50% of their time providing this care. And this care definitely takes a toll on everyone, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. And today we'll be discussing various aspects of the challenges you face as a caregiver, and how you can help yourself. We'll listen in to two very beautiful, lovely ladies who are also have at some point of time taken some Vedana services, and they have their own experiences as caregivers, and they are both successful in their careers. So and I'm delighted to have you all here. So I'd like to just introduce Yoshita. Yoshita is a life coach, and she has her own consultancy program which she runs, and then she has also been a caregiver to her father, and I think she has she has a lot of stories to share and about her experiences. And then I have Suchismita. We are working currently also with Suchismita's mother. Suchismita is a caregiver not only for her mother but also her mother-in-law. And I also have with me my co-founder, Dr. Jayashree Das Gupta. She's a neuropsychologist, and she is currently based out of Ireland. She's pursuing a Atlantic Fellowship in Global Brain Health. So while we all face the day-to-day things, she's there analyzing and trying to figure out what works best, and then that is how we kind of infuse that learning into a lot of the programs which Samvedna has designed and developed. So without taking any further time, I think, Jayashree, I'll hand it over to you to please start the conversation with Yoshita and Suchismita. And over to you, Jayashree.
Thanks a lot, Archana, and it's a real pleasure to have you all join us today, and also be here with Yoshita and Suchismita. Before we begin, I'd just like to let everyone know that this is being recorded and live streamed. So you can share the links with anyone else who you would like to join the conversation. Also, we will be taking questions through the course of the conversation. So feel free to type your question into the chat and we can bring it up with our panelists today. You can do that either, to everyone, or you can just message myself or Archana privately, and we can share your question anonymously if you would prefer it that way. So with that, let's start this conversation. I mean, we're really here today to talk about, how to build resilience whilst being in a caregiving role. And with that, Yoshita, I'd just like to ask whether you could share some of your experiences as a caregiver. So over to you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jayashree, and thank you, Archana, as well, for inviting me to talk about my experiences. I firmly believe that, caregiving is a journey. It's a journey of discovery. It's also a journey of self-discovery. My caregiving journey actually began about a year back when we found that my father's dementia had suddenly seen a sea change, and my parents were not living here; they were living elsewhere, and there was just I could sense in my conversations with my mother that things were going downhill, and it was impacting her. And then, so we all kind of got together as a family, and our first and primary thing was that how can we take care of our mother, because she was in the primary caregiver role. And my father has stopped speaking. In that whole process, Jayashree, I think what I figured out is that I was actually started off as a secondary caregiver, because I was caregiver to my mother, who was also the primary caregiver. But circumstances happened in a way where we realized, because I went and saw my parents, and I realized that my mother's BP was down. She was not sleeping. And that was my first understanding of what impact it can have on family. And the fact that I, as the child, also needed to step in and do something to make some shifts happen. And then thereafter, we moved them, and now they are my neighbors. And so my role has become more active. My role also entailed finding the right medical care, because I realized that where they were, the medical care was not really what it should be. And so as I told you, it was a process of discovery. It was not a hit and trial. It was the family coming together, me, my sibling, and our spouses. And we created a WhatsApp group which was called Papa's Health. And all health related stuff went on there. And it was also a time of great overwhelm for me, like emotional overwhelm, because I came face to face with your parents' mortality in that sense. And that was kind of scary, overwhelming. And at that time, I also reached out to my friends. I reached out to people who had gone through similar experiences. And in that whole journey, I also found some Vedana, and I went through some caregiver counseling for myself, because every day there was a new story that was coming up. Every day was a new day. Every day there was a new situation. And not having any precedence on that, and just trying to figure out, okay, now what? And that is where I felt that I was not being able to take decisions. And that is where the counseling helped me. So that was the initial part. And then after that, things have stabilized. My parents have now also stabilized in this new location, Gurgaon. And now it is all about like just making sure that they're supported, and that, I'm there for them physically and emotionally to support them through that journey. So yeah, in a nutshell, I would say that's what the journey has been.
Thanks a lot for sharing that, Yoshita. I mean, I think you seem to have been very proactive right from the word go, in terms of taking on a lot of these caregiving responsibilities. You seem to have made some very significant changes to your life, and you really seem to have somehow pulled together support from different members of your families. And perhaps we'll kind of come back to several of these themes through the course of the conversation today later on. But thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe I could just quickly turn over to Sujismita and ask you to share a bit about your caregiving journey.
Sure. Like Yoshita, I'm grateful to you for involving me in this, because I think one of the pangs that a caregiver feels is not being heard. Even though people are really listening to you, your organization is different, because your business is this. I mean, this is your primary concern. So it helps to talk to an audience who gets what you're trying to say, or who is receptive to what you're going through. So I have been a caregiver. As of 2019, I was a caregiver for almost 15 years to three old ladies, not just one and two. Because after my father died in 1999, my mother was more or less dependent on me, because my brother was first in Australia and then in London. But I was caring for her remotely, because she was still physically active. She did her own cooking. So it was more about the logistical challenges of aaj bai nahi aayi hai, or she has sacked some maid, or some kind of stuff like that. But then, because she'd been a diabetic for very long, she slowly her health started deteriorating. And then, like Yoshita, I realized that the geographical distance makes it very, very difficult to be a caregiver. So I moved her to Gurgaon. Like I have a flat across the road where she now stays. So, but this was over the past 10 years or so. And then after my father-in-law died, my mom-in-law moved in with me. And we also had my husband's nanny, who she was something like dai hoti thi purani. She came into their lives when my husband was 1 month old as his ayah. And she had stayed on ever since. So when I got married and came into the family, she was introduced to me as his second mother, and literally. So once he grew up, she took over the housekeeping. And then in 2012, she had a stroke and she was paralyzed from the right side. So the caregiver herself became in need of care. So like overnight, then my mom-in-law and Aima moved in with us. So since then, I had been for 15 odd years, I was taking care of my mother-in-law and Aima and my mother remotely at that time, So yes, there were huge challenges, because although I'd been living in Gurgaon for a long time, I really had no idea about geriatric care. What kind of doctors to have. Fortunately, in Gurgaon, we have wonderful facilities. So the first thing was, the first challenge was the logistical challenge, figuring out how to set them up, getting their appointments, etc., etc. And then again, as it happens, at that time, I was at the peak of my career. And when you are in a senior position, I had to do a lot of traveling. I had to go to my head office in London and Singapore. And each time I went, it was like putting everything in place before I went, so that, there would be no issues, because my children were young, they were in college. My husband also had a very demanding career. He was also traveling. So it was like, you can't say no when you have to go for a meeting. And in those days, Zoom didn't exist, So, there was no question of online meetings. So then it's about, how am I going to make things continue to work? So the work-life balance was a bit of a challenge. But then I also realized now, in retrospect, that once you put systems in place, once you learn to delegate, once you learn to prioritize, it helps a lot. You have to shut your eyes to that little corner of dust in your room, because that is not as important as making sure that you're eating right or going for a walk, So it's a question of also prioritizing what is really important in your life and figuring that out. Again, the emotional roller coaster was really bad, because I think the first thing one faces is denial, because you can't imagine, as far as you're concerned, your parents are immortal. And then to suddenly have this role reversal when your parent becomes a child, it's very, very difficult to take that, to understand that they are vulnerable, that they're turning to you for every decision. But then once you take on that role again, it becomes very fulfilling, because then, when you walk into a room and their face lights up when they see you, then you realize that, okay, it's been worth it. At least you're able to give them the dignity and the quality of life that they deserve, or that they've been used to all these years. No? So after you have overcome the logistical and the medical challenges and able to figure out a work-life balance, life gets a little easier. And again, as Yoshita said, support systems are very important. I'm very, very fortunate to have a supportive family. My brother, although he lives abroad, has literally opened out his bank account to me, because it's a very expensive thing. Caregiving is a very expensive thing, right? So, and since he doesn't have any children, and then there is also the guilt of knowing that between the two of us, I'm the one who's doing the lion's share of the work. So the only support that he can give me is that, don't worry about the money, I will take care of her. And that's a huge support.
That's a huge support. I can understand. Yes,
all of us are still very privileged that we can afford this kind of support. There are many people who are not, and I have had to take decisions when I'm like, should I go in for this more expensive line of treatment, or should I go in for something cheaper, because I don't know how long this is required. I don't know how long I can sustain it. So even in privileged positions, people, for us it's difficult. I can imagine how much more difficult it must be for the common person, right? So
Sushmita, if you don't mind, could I just pause you there, because I think both of you have such a lot of lived experience, and we have people listening in today who are probably struggling with similar challenges, or who know somebody who's experiencing similar difficulties. And I think this kind of this wealth of experience that you bring through having cared for your loved ones so intimately is really valuable. But before we turn to hearing more about what you've done to actually help you through this caregiving journey, I was wondering if we could just understand a bit more from our participants today about what they think the kind of challenges a caregiver experiences. So we actually have a poll question, and we'd like you all to participate in this poll so that we can get a better sense of what do you think are the challenges that caregivers are experiencing. So Archana, would it be possible to put up, can everybody see the poll?
Yes.
The question? Yes. So I'll give you all a couple of seconds to just respond to this. What are the kind of challenges that you think a caregiver can experience? Is it managing their time, emotional and physical stress, lack of privacy, financial strains, mental health concerns, feeling a lack of support or other resources? Anything that we haven't mentioned here, we'd really like to know from you. What is it that you feel are the challenges that caregivers are experiencing? So if you can just respond to the poll question, we can quickly get a sense of what people are thinking. Just give it a couple of more seconds. So Yoshita's mentioning the challenge of balancing life as well as the tug of war between work and home. Huge challenge, yes. And let's talk more about that, because I'm sure that there are several women and men as well who are experiencing some of these issues. We have another participant mentioning, the challenge of taking time out for themselves. Okay, so I'm just going to close the poll now, and let's see what results we have. So we can see that clearly all of these appear to be challenges that caregivers experience, and majority of people who've responded to the poll feel that it is the emotional and physical stress of caregiving, followed by the time management related issues, which I think, Suchishnita, you were just referring to some of those things. Maybe what we can do is, I know that our participants have a lot of questions that they would like to ask you both, given your experience, and I'd like to encourage participants to put their questions into the chat so that we can start to respond to these questions and really understand what we can actually do to overcome some of these challenges that we all know that caregivers do experience at some point or the other. And maybe I could begin with one question that we have on the chat. How does one build resilience towards everyday caregiving? And how do you address that burnout that you experience as a caregiver? So maybe Yoshita, I could turn over to you first, and you could just share some of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's been a learning, like I said, for me as well. I think after the initial phase of denial and reaching to a place of, sometimes anger that why has this happened to me and all of that, I think what dawned upon me is that, okay, now this has happened. Now, what am I going to do about it? Right. And that is where the first spark starts, that, okay, we need to deal with this, and we need to deal with this the best that we can. I think the trap that I see that coming up for me as well as for my mom is that caregiving can be very consuming. It can just totally consume you, like it just becomes your purpose, right? And then you have to, and then you start burning out. Like I told you, in the case of my mother, her sleep was completely gone. Her BP had dropped really low, and all of that happened. So there was a physical manifestation. Now, I think that's a wake-up call. I think the family needs to look at each other to see, okay, who's dealing with what. That's one. The second thing is that for an individual, it's very important to define some boundaries that, okay, this cannot take over my life. My life is still there. And I think I must call out that, the session that I had with Navya were she's the counselor at Samvedna. I think those are very useful in helping me make that shift, that this cannot become my life. I have a life, I have a family, I have work, I have so many other responsibilities, and you cannot pour from an empty cup. So once you kind of understand that, then you have to see, okay, what is it that will fill my cup so that I can continue being the caregiver that I want to be. And for me, the realization was that, figuring out a few things in my daily routine which are nurturing for myself have to become part of my routine. Early morning, and early morning is my time. It has always been my time. So what I do in that morning, 1 or 2 hours, really sets the course for the rest of my day. And I have to do that without guilt. I think that's another thing we struggle with, that, okay, if I'm having fun, but my loved one who's a patient is not having that fun. Right. So you have to be able to get a little bit detached and to be able to say that, okay, it's okay for me to nourish myself, whether it's through a hobby, whether it's through yoga, whether it's through journaling or meeting my girl gang of friends, so that I can keep myself sane. And I think that has been my learning.
That's really, there's some amazing tips that you've shared there, Yoshita, and all of these, in fact, have a lot of scientific evidence and background behind them to show that, how important it is to create healthy boundaries for a caregiver and not be consumed by the guilt that, when you're taking time out for yourself to do something that you value, you're actually giving less to the person you're caring for. And you've mentioned some really important, simple, things that we can try to incorporate. It's not that one thing can work for everybody, but there are several things that you could try, and one of them, until you come across that one thing that works for you. So you mentioned yoga, you've mentioned going out with your group of core friends, journaling. All of these are fantastic tips and things that actually do help you feel better. And these are really critical to incorporate into your day and things that build your resilience as a caregiver. So thank you so much.
Can
Go
I just
ahead. Yeah.
add one more thing that came to my mind? So, as I said, there was a time when my father stopped speaking. And it was really sad time for me because I used to have long conversations with him. I started writing letters, and he would never respond to those letters. But for me, that was like an emotional journaling. And the other thing which I think has built my resilience, over the years I've been practicing it, is gratitude. So finding moments in your daily life, little moments where in that moment you just feel that joy and you're like just grateful for it. And that happens to me so for example, now if I go over to my mom's place and my father would play a ball with me, catch, for me that's that moment. Or we are sitting together watching some random YouTube video and he's smiling, and that's enough. So identifying and just stopping in that moment of that, where you get that little bit spurt of joy and just being grateful for that, I think that has also helped build my resilience.
That's wonderful, Yoshita. Before I turn to Suchismita, I know there's a lot of questions that have actually come up on the chat, and I'd like to take those. And these are really around the kind of support that's available for caregivers. So before we move to that, Archana, could we have the next poll question? I want to understand from people who are listening in today, what do they think are the kind of supports that are available for caregivers? So if we can just take about 30 seconds to quickly respond to this, what do you think is the kind of support that's available for caregivers? And remember here, we're talking about the person who's in that caregiving role, the person who's providing support to someone with a medical condition or something that they need support for their daily needs, for care. So just give it a couple of seconds more. Okay, so great. So just quickly pop your responses into the poll. We'll give it maybe another 1 or 2 seconds. And I think it seems I can maybe just close the poll right now and share the results with everyone. So you should be able to see the results of those who've responded to the poll. And it seems that most people feel medical support, followed by emotional support, is what is available for caregivers. And I think that that's something that's quite interesting. Suchismita, maybe because you've mentioned you've been in a caring role for a fairly long time. And as a caregiver, obviously there must be times when you've needed support. We have several questions in the chat, which are really asking, how can you deal with the emotional stress of providing care? And what are the kind of supports that you felt helped you through your journey?
I think initially, because of the medical condition, getting a lot of support from doctors, because the problem with very well-known doctors is that they're never available for you. I have discovered the hard way that going to the topmost surgeon or going to the topmost specialist doesn't really work, because they're so busy. They will not answer your small, your small little queries, which may seem very small to them, but they're very important to me, because the person I'm talking about is very important. So I have always gone for the middle level of people, because I need to have a doctor who's available to me. I need to have a doctor who will either answer my call or answer my messages. So I would rather go in for someone who does not have a fancy medical degree from a foreign university, but someone who will pick up the phone when I need to, So and I have found that it's worked perfectly fine. The oldies in my family are doing fairly well with this kind of advice. So medical support, fortunately, like I said, Gurgaon has the best of it. Funnily enough, I got a lot of emotional support from my mother's physiotherapist because she fractured her hip when she was in a senior citizen home in Pune, and this was at the peak of COVID, and I had to fly her down on a stretcher and move her to Gurgaon. So with this physiotherapist was an old family friend, and when he saw me in that stress, when I was breaking down every day because I was frightened, I couldn't understand. Most of our fear comes from the unknown. We don't know what is happening because doctors don't give you the time of day, or they don't really explain the ramifications of what is happening. So he would sit me down and, after the physio, and he didn't need to do that. He would spend 1 hour of physiotherapy and half an hour with me over a cup of tea to calm me down and to tell me it's going to work. I'm going to help her. We're going to make her walk with a walker. Don't worry. So sometimes you get support from the most unexpected quarters. Of course, your family and friends are also there. But to add to what Yoshita said, yes, definitely very important for you when you're talking about resilience. Very, very important for you to have something to keep that gives you joy. I love doing crochet. It's the most stress busting thing for me. So that's the one time, the joy of creating something with wool or with thread. It helps to keep my mind, occupied. And of course, I do try to continue, even though I'm semi-retired now, I do try to continue taking freelance assignments because when I'm editing, my mind is focused on that. I'm not thinking about kal sabzi lana hai, ye karna hai, wo karna hai. That's the one time because I have to focus on my work. I am completely, immersed in that. So I prefer to have at least assignments which keep me occupied for half a day. A, to keep my brain working. B, to feel fulfilled because I love my work. And C, to get my mind out of this. Funnily enough, I would say one of the greatest supports we've had post-COVID is the online ordering. It has taken it has actually given me so much of free time rather than having to go to Mother Dairy and pick up the vegetables or go to a shop and pick up the fish. Now I just straight away order everything online and everything gets delivered at home. I don't have to worry about, raat ko 10:30 baje didi mummy ka diaper khatam ho gaya kind of stuff, and then tomorrow morning I need it first thing in the morning. Amazon delivers. So I think these small things have also made a lot of difference. Emotionally, I would probably say also it's important. It's very hard. Let me tell you, I'm still struggling with it. You have to switch off. You see, because you see the patient suffering, you suffer with the patient, and that is what causes the stress. So nowadays, I try to think like a doctor would. So if my mother-in-law says, "Kamar mein bahut dard ho raha hai," I don't try to feel her pain because nobody can feel her pain. I start asking her questions. What are the symptoms? When did it start? Is it happening more when you're lying down? So I try to talk her through it and then give her whatever medications. We've all become half doctors now living with geriatrics, So you give her the medicine. But that little bit of time that I spend with her, sometimes I realize it's also just psychological. It's attention getting because they feel we are so busy with our lives. That 5 minutes that I've given her, she feels acha kisi ne meri baat sun li hai, So I think it's also about divorcing yourself from trying to suffer with that person, because that is counterproductive. Then you become so exhausted yourself, then you get into the negative emotions of frustration and rage and bitterness about you feel trapped, etc., etc. So the thing is that you sometimes have to shut out the emotional part of it and just look at it as a medical issue. This is your problem. Let's find a solution for it and just go ahead. That is the only thing that will help you to stay sane in this situation.
No, thank you so much, Suchismata. And I think that's really wonderful advice. And you've again really highlighted the importance of boundaries, really. I mean, I remember Yoshita was speaking earlier about how important it was to, create that boundary between experiencing guilt when you're taking time out from yourself for yourself. And you're talking about also creating another healthy boundary between actually, experiencing the pain that you're seeing a loved one going through, but kind of creating a boundary so that you can observe that more objectively. And that actually provides you with a lot of agency to do something about it. Like you were beautifully sharing that you're actually able to then, provide something that can actually help her in some way or give her the kind of emotional support, just the attention that she may be requiring for that time. So we're sometimes very reluctant to create that boundary. And I think that's one thing that I would just like to highlight, that it's again, really important to create healthy boundaries when we are caregivers in various different spaces. But with that, maybe Arjun, I could ask you to bring up the next poll question. And I think this is around the impact of caregiving. Does caregiving have an impact on physical and mental well-being, or is it just one or the other? What do people feel? So we give it a couple of seconds. And I'll just close the poll and share the results of those who've responded. And I think we can see that most people who are listening in, several of whom are caregivers themselves, or know someone who's in a caregiving role, feel that caregiving does impact both physical and mental well-being. And I think that that's something which we would like to really highlight. And we really need to think about how this can, what we can do to address both of these aspects for ourselves as caregivers. With that, maybe we can just do a couple of questions that are in the chat. You were talking about, we were talking earlier about really the emotional impact of caregiving. And we have one question here, and maybe I could just direct this to Yoshita and Suchishanta, please feel free to kind of like, respond as well. But how do you deal with the anticipatory grief? Because that can be very depressing. How do you deal with that, Yoshita?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. And so I'll just share a little bit of my own experience with this. So there was this time when, as a dementia patient, one of the things that happens is our swallowing function reduces. And you're supposed to, and if you go Google it, which all of us now do, it says that bad swallowing, which leads to food going into the wrong place, leads to infection, which leads to the death of the patient, right? So anticipatory grief. So my father started choking and on food, and he couldn't have water without coughing, and my goodness, what doomsday predictions, and that now we will have to put a tube in his stomach, and all of that happened. And I think that was when, that was actually the turning point where we made the decision to move him here. But the learning that I have had through that is that you cannot control the future. And all you have, the agency which you spoke about, is this moment. And what's the best I can do in this moment, right? And I have learned, and I think collectively, because we are a family which is very close and we keep talking to each other and we pool in our combined wisdom. I think we've all learned that, okay, one day at a time. Don't, have a discipline not to go into future. What's going to happen 6 months from now? What's going to happen 12 months from now? Just today. What needs to be done today? At best tomorrow. And I think for me, that has been a mindset shift, because otherwise it gets very depressing. If you talk to people I also joined the Facebook community of dementia caregivers. It's an international community. And that also became very depressing for me, because people would, who were ahead in that journey of taking care of a dementia patient would put their stuff. And I realized, no, I can't do this. It's not helping. So anticipating the future and a dismal future totally ruins your current present moment. And that is a discipline that we all have to inculcate, one day at a time.
It's tough, but I mean, that's
Yeah.
real, experience talking. Suchismita, I wondered if you had anything to add to that. And also, again, maybe another question that we've had from participants, which I often hear people asking, is how do you really control yourself, from reacting to unnecessary statements or, hurtful statements often that your loved ones make? Because they're in pain. They're experiencing changes in their life that we haven't seen before. And sometimes they do say things that are very hurtful. So how do you control yourself in those situations as a caregiver?
Okay, so to take the first question about anticipatory grief, yes, I did face a lot of it, particularly when I first discovered that my mother would need more care than I'd expected. But COVID taught me a few very, very hard lessons. I lost 2 members of my family in the prime of their lives. I lost a niece at the age of 35 who was 1 week away from delivering her baby, and both mother and child died. And that taught me that you cannot control what happens in your life. If something could happen to somebody like this, and her family, her immediate family, my cousin and his family, it's been a year now, are still coming to terms with that. Here are people who are already literally have 1 foot in the grave. None of us is immortal. Death is going to come to all of us. It's a question of how is it going to. So I've become very philosophical about it. I feel they have lived their lives. They are now in need of care. We give them the care so that they are able to live with dignity as long as they are alive. But I don't want to lose them, or I don't want them to die, is a very foolish thing to say, because all of us are going to die. Either we will die a natural death, or we will die while crossing a road. I mean, I've just become very brutal about it. So my job is not to think about what is going to happen when my mother's no longer there. My job is to make sure as long as she's here, she should be happy. She should be able to live with dignity. So that is how, so there is no, literally, there is no place for anticipatory grief in my life because I have too much going on as it is. It's more about compartmentalizing all the stuff that I have. The second question was about, what was it again?
So basically, one of the things that someone wanted
Yeah,
to
how do you react? So that is
react,
something.
yes.
I had been undergoing therapy to help me to deal with all these stresses, particularly when I was still with my job. I quit in 2019 because I couldn't take these multiple challenges, and there are some things that are non-negotiable. Taking care of your parents is non-negotiable, but giving up a job is possible. It's like I think it was Nida Fazli who said, "Kabhi kisi ko mukammal jahan nahi milta." कहीं जमीन तो कहीं आसमान नहीं मिलता. So yes, I had to give up on a flourishing career. I made compromises. I may be upset, I may be disappointed, but if given the choice, I would make that choice all over again. Right? So the thing is that once I have made those choices, yes, there was a time when I sought therapy because I felt that I was really teetering on the edge. And one of the things my therapist taught me was learn to respond and not react. When somebody says there's a difference between reacting and responding. So when somebody, and this is not just for the people you're caring for, it's also for your family members, right? So when somebody says something that upsets you, don't react to it. Try to understand the thought behind it and just respond to the thought without all the frills of emotion. So I tried very hard to, take a deep breath, try to figure out where that statement is coming from. And obviously with a mother with dementia, there is just no connection with what she's saying, and so I mean, taking those seriously doesn't make sense. So sometimes we actually just laugh it across. The last thing she told Ravina was that Narendra Modi came for her mother's funeral. So we all laughed and we tried to figure out Narendra Modi was 8 years old when my grandmother died or something like that, So we just laugh about it sometimes, and that helps you to cope. Laughter is very, very important, so it's just about definitely not reacting to it. It's more about responding to it and, keeping the affective part of it completely out of the whole.
That's really wonderful. And I think that's a very important distinction that you've drawn between reacting and responding. And it's usually easier to respond to a situation when you take that deep breath at that moment. You react instantaneously, but in order to respond to a situation, if you allow yourself just a pause, take a deep breath, it gives you that critical time to just, reorganize your thoughts and then respond to a situation. Look at it a slightly different way, like you were, beautifully mentioning, the humorous side of things sometimes, and that's really wonderful. I know we have very limited time, and we have a lot of questions. I was wondering if we can just quickly run through some of the questions which have come up on the chat with some very quick responses. What how do you avoid caregiver anxiety and accept it as part of normal life? 2 tips from both of you. Maybe I could just turn to Yoshita first and then Suchesmita.
I think to overcome caregiver anxiety, just start living in the moment. I think anxiety just comes out of that anticipatory stress, what's going to happen tomorrow and all of that. So if we can train ourselves to just focus on, okay, am I doing my best now? If I'm doing my best now, I'm okay. And the patient is also okay, right? Because I know I've given my best. And making that, I think that's my only tip, that's the only way to look at anxiety from a in the moment perspective. The other thing is really, how are you building your own resilience? What are you doing for that, so that anxiety doesn't hit you and doesn't sweep you away? And for that, I would recommend that just figuring out what is your me time and what are you doing in that me time. Whether you meditate, you do yoga. I recommend yoga. There was another question that you had asked in the poll, emotional and physical. I feel yoga takes care of both the things, right? And your levels of anxiety, your levels of worry, all those kind of reduce. And that makes you more equipped. So, yeah.
Wonderful. So, Suchesmita, I need 2 tips from your side.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have zero mind control. I've tried very hard. My yoga teacher, I think, finally gave up on me, because I do all the physical asanas, but cannot control my mind for more than 5 seconds at a time. So, but what has helped me, because again, I suffered from insomnia because of the stress, and I was on sleeping pills, and I didn't like being addicted to anything. So, but what has worked for me is I have started, tuning. I think there are these websites like Headspace, etc., which give you, those before you go to sleep, that soothing music that you listen to before you go to sleep. So now I don't just do it at bedtime. Whenever I face a potentially anxious situation, yes, I step back and I try to do the logistical things that are required. But if it is still bothering me, I just shut myself up in a room and play that music and just go through the steps there. A guided meditation works for me. I do not have the mind control to do it myself. Somebody telling me, now take 3 deep breaths, then think of this, then think of that, that works for me. I need to be guided through it. I do not yet have the maturity, or I have not reached that level when I can do this myself. So I seek help where required. Or again, as Yoshita said, sometimes I just, I reach out to a friend and say, I just want to get out of the house. I can't bear to be in the house anymore. So we go shopping, or we don't go. In those days, we never went for movies, but just spending a day out or splurging on a lunch. Fortunately, I live next to Cyber Hub, so there's lots of places to splurge. So, it's just that the same thing, me time, just something that makes you feel better, whether there's retail therapy or something, but also to physically get out of that situation. If you get out of that situation physically, it helps you to put it at the back of your mind for a bit. And then when you come back, you're energized. And probably that time that you've taken helps you to look at it in a more objective kind of perspective.
Wonderful. I think, again, these are some really, simple things that people can do. And as we were discussing earlier, the same solutions don't necessarily have to work for everyone. And the same thing may not work for you each time. So it's important to kind of look at this as almost like a toolkit or a box of things that you can dip into when you're feeling low as a caregiver, to help you, uplift your mood, deal with that emotional stress, and deal with that anxiety or the grief or whatever it is that you're experiencing at that time, and break that cycle, really. So thank you for sharing those experiences. I think we have Bhavna had raised her hand, and if we can, Bhavna, if you had something which you would like to say, could I request you to unmute and share your thoughts quickly?
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for this wonderful talk, very important. We all have been through different stages of this. I'm Bhavna. This is my mother, Krishna Gautam, and we are sibling and parent of Archana. And we lost our father last year, and my mother was the primary caregiver. And
though I had an attendant with me, but still I couldn't leave him alone. Just depend on the dependent. And I would feel so bad, although he would say, why don't you go out? You go out, but I couldn't. And after that, now I have started getting depression kind of a thing. Every time, whenever I'm free, my brain doesn't work. And just thinking of him, just thinking of him. That's what's happening. I'm feeling alone now. That's the main thing. Though Archana and Bhavna, you know, are both such good caretakers. They take care of me. They have taken good care of their father. Whatever they could do, they did. But still, you know, now I understand that really people say this is life, partnership, and this we can't.
I think I completely agree.
Is
Yeah.
anywhere
Right.
else without him. Though.
I think I completely agree with you, because the one thing I cannot give my mothers is
Yeah.
the emotional support. You see, they feel emotionally isolated because they
Yeah.
are away from their peer group, which is why my mother moved to a senior citizen home in Pune. She said, "You आप तो अपने नौकरी में बिजी हो, आप 1 घंटे के लिए आते हो मेरे पास, सैटरडे संडे को आते हो. What do I do all day long? I'm just watching TV. At least if I go, I'll have people of my age group," which worked for a year or so, and then COVID struck. And everybody was shut up in their homes. Obviously, in a geriatric home,
Yeah.
you have to be extra careful. And then she fell down and hurt herself.
But during
So I-
COVID, we couldn't move out. No? That was the thing. Even
Yeah.
Archana lost one of her cousins. He was very young,
Right.
42
Right.
years.
Right. So I think the one
now
thing
you can share this so that
Yeah.
others can also maybe learn, because you are very good in the sense you do try to keep yourself busy, although
Yeah.
like you were saying, Suchismita, mind works non-stop. I mean, you know, hers and mine also, but
Mine works all day.
and
So I
so
don't know how to keep my.
but you do, why don't you tell them how you spend your day with your friends
Yeah,
and
that's
all,
what we have-
neighbors? Yeah.
Although I have been living here for the last 55 years in Janakpur itself, we have a good group of ladies of our age. So in the mornings, we go in the park and that's it. And then we have a temple here. We have parties on birthday, anyone's
lovely.
birthday. We keep ourselves busy. But still, when I am at home, this brain doesn't calm down.
Right
That's
now,
what I'm
she's
saying.
missing her park gang get together at this time. It happens 5 to 7 in
Then-
the park.
In the neighborhood, we have got a big temple, very big temple. So thrice a week, we are busy over there because I had been a member of that management committee and doing everything. But still, now I am feeling, he would say, why don't you go? You go out. But I couldn't leave him alone. That I can't go like
And I think I really want to highlight
that.
how,
I don't know.
and I think it's really beautiful that you've brought out these aspects, because you've highlighted something that I think is really important for all caregivers to remember. And sometimes it's one of those easy things that we can forget, is the power that the community gives us. When we draw strength, we look to immediately to family or to friends, but also the community can be a great source of strength and support. And we need to do more to leverage the support from the community. And I think for people who are in a caregiving role right now, it's really important also to just highlight that the person you're caring for wants you to be happy. They don't want to see you upset. So when you're happy as a caregiver, even though they may have lost their ability to express that they are happy to see you that way, that's what they want. And if somewhere, if that's something which we can remember, that can also help with caregivers in terms of, dealing with the guilt of focusing on themselves, which, as we're discussing through this conversation, is something that I think both Yoshita and Suchismita have really highlighted. So thank you so much, Auntie, for sharing that experience with us. And I think we're really here having this conversation so that we can learn from each other's experiences and help each other through this journey. Because as Archana was mentioning at the beginning, it is women who naturally fall into this caregiving role almost, unexpectedly, or as the natural caregivers. And a lot of the challenges that they're experiencing remain unrecognized by the larger society, although at an individual, at a family level, I think, and we're all able to see the challenges, the changes that, someone we know who's stepped into that caregiving role has had to make. I think it would be wonderful if we could have more supports from the community for this. And maybe with that, I'd just like, Archana, if you could bring up the last whole question that we have. We close today's discussion in the next couple of minutes. I'd really like to understand what do people think caregivers need to really improve well?
Socially active,
All of
by seeking help from
So
others.
just put in your
enough
responses.
sleep.
What do you
enough
feel?
sleep, yeah.
And put in your responses to what do we feel is required to improve well-being. I'm just going to give it a couple of more seconds so that we can get.
There's something which I'm very interesting to say. So once you close this, please give me 1 minute for that.
Sure. So I think we have most of our responses in, and I'm just going to close the poll and share the results with you all. So as you can see from the results, it does seem like there is, it's definitely important to focus on all these aspects, and definitely focus on self-care. But let me turn to Yoshita. You had something that you wanted to
Yeah,
share.
what I want to share is that in our culture, there is too much prominence given to being a strong woman who deals with everything. And I personally believe there is no glory in doing everything on your own. And I wanted to put it out there because so many caregivers, all women, right? You don't have to be the strong one, the one who's always sacrificing one, and the one who's putting herself last, because that doesn't work in the long run. And in the long run, what works is when you seek support, and there's a lot of strength in saying, I need help. And there is, it just gets you back on track much faster rather than depleting you. So I think just that was my thing, that there's no glory in trying to do everything on your own. And that's what I wanted to say.
Wonderful, thought to kind of end with. I mean, I wish we had more time because there are some questions in the chat which unfortunately we've not had a chance to get to. There are some wonderful comments from people who are listening in, and I really would like to just take this moment to appreciate the participation from the audience in this conversation. Maybe before we end, just some final thoughts from you as well, Sujismita.
I don't know. I mean, since I don't know many of our participants, all I want to say for those of you who are already in the caregiving role, there are a few practical things. I don't know if we'll have the time, because these are the issues that I faced myself, which I feel that we tend to miss out on. For instance, one day we are going to be in this position. So it's also important for you to plan for it. Small things like getting your insurance in place. Unfortunately, our medical insurance does not cover outpatients, does not cover things like mental health. So it's also about not only taking care of your parents right now, or whoever you're caring for. It's also planning for a day when you are going to be like that. So it's very, very important to make sure that you have prepared for this financially, prepared for this in terms of, emotionally, either whether it is making your will or what's going to happen if one of you is when the spouse is not there, making sure that you you know each other, you know you know your investments, etc., etc. Because most of our, at least I don't know, most of our children tend to be away or are completely clueless about these things. So I have seen a lot of my cousins being completely shattered when their spouses passed away because they didn't even know what bank accounts they had, etc., etc. So it's also being practical about knowing that you're not going to live forever, and therefore do have an exit strategy in place, so that so that you are not left literally in the lurch when something happens to you. Tomorrow you might just lose your memory. You won't remember your locker number. You may not remember anything, right? So have it all documented somewhere. Let your family know where these things are, so that you're not inconveniencing yourself or anybody in your family.
Thank you so much. And I think, again, both of you have raised something that's so practical. Yoshita, you mentioned how important it is to not, as a woman, not take on that burden of care entirely yourself, but reach out to others. And Suchismita, you really highlighted the importance of planning ahead. And that's really important, again, for women who are caregivers and in that role, because we're going to need support from those around us. And we don't really know when we're going to need what kind of support. So it's just important for all of us really to be prepared. It's never too early to start. So with that, unfortunately, I wish we could have had more time to talk about this, but I'm just going to invite Archana to share a bit about some of the initiatives that Samvedna has for caregivers. We do have a support group, and we have another assessment tool which we have that caregivers can use. So Archana, maybe I could just hand over to you and you would like to wrap up the session today.
Sure. Thank you, Jayashree. So thank you, everyone. I think Yoshita and Suchismita, you were just amazing. And I think your experiences are wonderful. I hope everybody here would will take away something, especially the me time and the fact that don't be too hard on yourself. You can only do that much. So that is very, very important. We as women, yesterday also we were in a conversation with a group of corporate women, and everybody was telling us how amazing they were, that they were doing all their responsibilities, the work as well as the home responsibilities. So I think we need to take it a little easy on us as women. And talking about Samvedna, so we like I'd mentioned earlier, we have a lot of programs for helping families, not only for elderly parents, but people who might have an ailing spouse or somebody who is dealing with the continuous caregiver stress because they have a child with special needs, or there are other family members whom they're caring for. We have met a lot of people who are caring for their siblings, So we have services which can help individuals. Of course, for dementia, Alzheimer's, we have we have a caregiver enablement program, in which we will teach the family as to how to deal with their loved ones, and it's very interactive, as well as it's a nice learning journey for the family members to know what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, what should they start, and things like that. And besides this, I'd like to share my screen. So Samvedna has, always been at the forefront of propagating awareness and, early detection of any illness. And with that in mind, we have this tool which is available at map.samvednacare.com. And this tool will let you go through a journey of assessing yourself on your mental well-being. So it's a very simple tool. You just take a quick test, and it will take you about maybe 2 to 3 minutes maximum to answer questions, and then it will give you an insight into how your mental well-being looks like, and then you could speak to a counselor to understand your results. We have a very good assessment for dementia, where you could actually take it for yourself or a spouse or for someone else. So if you have a family member or anyone else in your network whom you would like to try to see if they have any signs of dementia, this is a great assessment to take. And And the third one is on caregiver stress. So caregiver burden, and are you really going through a caregiver stress? When is it the right time to seek professional help? So this tool will help you, understand that. So it's a very simple, you could take one of these, you could take all of them, depending on what your requirement is. And, you could start your self-care journey. So, this is how I'll just show you my dashboard, how it looks like. And if you see here, I'll see all my assessments and I'll be able to see my results. And then if I see my results, then I can click on a button to speak to a counselor, book an appointment. That is one part of it. The other part of it is really that I can start my self-care. So, we have built a wonderful module of self-care around the 8 dimensions of wellness. And every day you will get a tip about your self-care, which, we would like you to follow. And if you have done it, you can mark it as done or not done. And then you can track your sleep as well as your mood, as whether it's you're dealing with a mental health issue or in sleep quality. And then, then you can also see your progress. So you can kind of see how well you're doing, how's your mood been. And then, you have activities which you're self-regulating. You can take this as a printout to your psychiatrist, doctor, if you want to show him what you have been doing about your self-care. So, we have all these amazing features, and then it has other aspects also. So do take a look at this and, try it out, because especially the tool is designed to encourage help-seeking behavior and not wait for something to happen. This is, it's simple. You can go and answer a few questions and get to know where you are. And then you can, of course, book a session with our counselor. First session is complimentary. So please, I would encourage you all to go ahead and try and share it with your family and friends, because it will be helpful for you. So with that, I would like to just thank you once again, Yoshita and Suchismita, and all our participants. Thank you, my mom, for sharing so much. And thank you, Jayashree. Always wonderful to hear your final thoughts on this. So thanks.
Thank you, everyone, once again for having us on board and for listening to us so patiently.
Thank you so much. It's been very enriching, and I really compliment you on this set of tools. I'm definitely going to try that.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And again, let's be more proactive about caregiving, and let's participate in this journey together, because I think one of the things we've heard from this conversation today is that there's nothing such as less support. Caregiving is a journey, and we need support along the way. So let's reach out for it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Josh.